communication sits on top of that psychological safety, right? You can have it once you have it. I think it's really important to look objectively at any time between what that person wants to do, where the role is.
You said that the PIPs often are addressing the symptoms rather than the root cause. Like, what do you mean by that?
If you're frustrated with the current process, there's just some small things that you can do.
In the book, you highlight a case study around David and helping employees find their dream job. Robert, it's such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
So we're recording today. It's November 19th. Not sure when this will drop, but your new book is out today. It's called Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice, Changing the Way Employers Leave Companies for the Better. And, you compare the traditional 2 weeks notice to an abrupt breakup in a personal relationship. So how do you think this analogy relates to, with employers and employees, that breakup, and how what does that reveal about the workplace culture?
Yeah, well, first, as I said, I'm glad to be speaking with you today, so I don't have to hit refresh on Amazon every couple minutes and see how it's doing, which is what you get stuck doing in the initial day. Yeah, when I started my TED Talk, I was trying to explain to people how ridiculous it was. And the book sort of starts off with that story. Like, if your partner came to you and said, hey, I'm leaving, I've got a new partner, I'm moving to a new city and I'm leaving in 2 weeks, you'd be like, WTF. And so would everyone else that knows you. And yet this has totally become normalized in the workplace. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. The biggest thing that I just, and why we originally formed this program in our company and just kind of not understanding why this existed, is that we've now probably for a decade or two, come to the realization that even in the best companies, like Glassdoor, top rank, this is not lifetime employment. So maybe even in under 30 years old, the average employee is with us for 2 to 3 years, whether they like us or hate us. Yet sort of how people leave companies everything else has changed, right? How we recruit has changed, culture has changed, but how people leave has not changed. And it's this abrupt shock on both sides in terms of, again, someone closing the door and bringing you in and say, hey, you got a minute, and telling you they're leaving in 2 weeks. Or everyone always gets a pit in their stomach when I tell them that, because they've been in that. Or the reverse is someone closes the door on you, says you got a minute, and you see HR in the room and you're maybe gone that day. And in both of those cases, we're sort of running that old playbook of like, hey, when we want to leave a job, we don't talk about it. We have doctor's appointments, we lie, we keep it to ourselves. And this just seems crazy to me, given, where the workplace is, and that we could have a different way for people to leave and more productive alumni. And it's better for the people and it's better for the company. And I just really, over the years, I've talked about this. Everyone that's tried it has like, yeah, you know what, this works so much better. I just didn't even know there was anything else to do. And so that's why I was sort of motivated to put the playbook together for leaders who wanted to kind of change this outdated practice.
For as long as I've been in the workplace, that the 2 weeks notice was the standard. Where does that come from?
It actually, it's a decidedly US thing, and it's not even legal. In sort of, why can't I think of the term, not work for hire, but now I'm blanking on the term in the US, where there's no contract, you can leave in a minute, but somehow that became sort of the respectable way to do things. It doesn't exist in other countries. So in other countries, there's statutory 3 months on both sides notice, and you can't leave for 3 months, and they can't get rid of you for 3 months. So it is a decidedly U.S. practice. And I think, I get it. For a lot of employees, the company will ask them to leave. So why do much more than that? Or why let them know? You've seen a lot of people walk to the door when they talk about leaving. So I talk about the people that have quit and stayed, right? They've already quit your organization, but they're just going to stay until they find a new job and then tell you. So it's really for the company and company's leadership to sort of say, hey, look, we want to do transitions differently. And when we see an issue and when you see an issue, come have a discussion. It's safe. We can work out. And the book talks about this concept of an open transition program. Like, how do you have a program where people can be, working their way out, and it and they know it, and they can interview. And we don't need all this lying and faking at the end. I mean, you have these analyst programs or whatever, where people know people are going to be there for a year or two, and yet they still don't have a way to do that in a different way than the kind of surprise and the 2 weeks notice, it's dumbfounding to me.
In the book, you were talking about how there's the leaders that you were talking to, they were so tired of when people leave, it's so disruptive.
Yeah.
What was one of the first things that you started looking at and trying to solve this problem when you probably before you created the open transition program?
Yeah, before we created the program, we came to a test case with patient zero, who I'll call Jim. So Jim had worked with us. Everyone loved Jim. He had worked with us for a while. He had been a performance improvement plan, and we should talk about that because there's so many problems and wrong things with performance improvement plans. And he kind of worked his way back from it, and he was kind of then falling into another lull that happens. And we were like, all right, we got to deal with Jim. Like, do we fire Jim? Do we do another PIP or whatever? And instead we started a conversation like, Jim, like what's going on? And Jim just really wanted to do something different. He liked the company. He didn't want to be in client services anymore. And so we were like, we had been wrestling with this problem anyway. We tried to build a great culture, and this 2 weeks notice thing just bothered me. So we're like, look, why don't we try this? Let's say to Jim, okay, like you start looking for a job. We'll start looking for your replacement. We'll sort of put this amount of time up there, and you don't have to lie. And let's see if we can like land both of these planes and make it a better outcome. And it worked really well. Now we made some mistakes, and I addressed those sort of in the 7 points in the last chapter on like how kind of key components of a open transition program. But we're like, oh, like that was a lot better. So we started to think about like how we could do this. And honestly, someone was asking me when the book was coming out today, because he wanted to give it to his managers. I've spoken a little bit about this stuff over the years. People have seen my TED Talk. They've read the article, and without any help, they just were that they decided to like try it. They to try to like sit down with Brandon and be like, Brandon, like what's going on? Like you don't seem happy lately. And everyone is like so surprised that like this actually produces a better result. But I get it. If you've never done anything else and you're not interested in improving it, you just keep doing the regular thing. And I do not encourage employees to start, having these open discussions in cultures where they've made it clear that they'll walk you to the door that day. Like this is an organizational led thing where they say, look, this is how we leave our company. We have a safe transition program, sort of 90 days is a good average. When you're ready to leave, like we'll kind of help you do that. And I think people are surprised at that. And again, we could talk about this PIP thing because I think it's the worst solution in a lot of cases.
I want to get into that. But first, like when we're talking about the open transition program, what are some of the cornerstones around that, making that program work? I know psychological safety is one of those, and I want to get into that. But what are the key components?
Yeah. So sort of key components are psychological safety, open communication, mutual respect, and this commitment to mutually beneficial outcomes. I think that's the high level elements that you have to have, right? So if a culture has psychological safety, it's collecting feedback, it's collecting data, some of these things, managers are doing one-on-ones right, then people are willing to speak up and talk about things that are not working systemically or for themselves. Again, you need communication. Communication sits on top of that psychological safety, right? You can have it once you have it. And there's a weird thing that happens, this mutual respect. Sometimes, like, if you're on my team, Brandon, and you're struggling, and I know I'm going to need to let you go. Like, rather than lean into the relationship, I start to solve the problem of cognitive dissonance, which is you can't hold two different things. I start to make you out to be a bad guy, because then it's easier for me to do a difficult thing rather than leaning in and being like, Brandon, love you. You've worked with me for 3 years. Like, objectively, like you're in the sales team, like you've missed quota for 4 quarters in a row. Like this isn't going to continue. Like what are we doing here? Do you want to do something else? Can I help you find a different job? Do you want to be in sales? Right. And then the last part is that's sort of the respect, right? Like figuring out like, look, you're an A player somewhere, but right now this isn't working. And then that mutually beneficial outcome. So how can I make this as good as possible? And look, when a job's coming to an end, it's never great, but as good as possible for you and for the organization as well.
When an organization doesn't have psychological safety, what do departures look like in those types of organizations?
Yeah, then they're fast and they're always a surprise. And, so there's an organization I had talked to some of its leaders years ago, and they loved their culture and they were ranked for all this culture. And I was asking them about this, like this was right as I was starting to sort of do this. I was like, so how, what do you do when someone says, they're going to leave or they give 2 weeks notice? And they said, well, we ask them to leave that day. And I was like, well, why do you do that? Well, we just feel like it's better and it's cleaner and it's elsewhere. And, and I was like, well, let me ask you, if people see that as soon as they give notice, whether it's a month or 2 weeks or whatever, they're kind of told to walk out that day with their box and they're sort of head in shame, and that they're not even trusted enough to be around the environment for more than 4 hours. Do you think that's more or less likely that people are going to then discuss with their manager?
More.
Yeah. So that's people. This is what people see, right? So again, I am super clear. This is not a book for employees to read and say, oh, I'm going to go start this open thing with my, if the company doesn't do it, then it's not going to work.
Those organizations that are probably lacking psychological safety and some of those other cornerstones of the OTP, what are some other objections that leaders that you've talked to, why they would reject OTP?
Lots of it. Everyone's got objections. This won't work. So first of all of the objections I've heard are from people who've never tried it, right? So there's, hey, it won't work for young employees. Well, actually, young employees they're not going to be there that long anywhere, so they're pretty flexible, and they'd rather kind of have honesty and transparency and have you help them do something different. Tenured employees, who's going to be more upset than a tenured employee to find out that you didn't have an honest discussion with them about their, performance after sort of 10 years? The other biggest thing is that this is the two biggest misconceptions of a PIP, and people will kind of slack off or steal things, or how can you have people at your company, that are leaving or otherwise? I was like, again, the devil, there are so many people at your company that have already quit. They're already gone. They've decided they're leaving. They hate their boss. Those are the ones stealing and filing stuff away. So by the time they give their notice, it's all stolen or the damage is done. The people who you're working with to help them move on in a productive way, who you're giving references for, who you're providing resources for, and you're kind of watching them, do you think that's the time they're really going to misbehave? And the whole stealing stuff thing is just not justified. But the biggest one by far is this: we already use performance improvement plans. And let's think about how a lot of companies use performance improvement plans. So, Brandon, you're not doing well in your role, and I put you on a performance improvement plan because legal says I need to do this. And so I'm kind of want to fire you in 30 days, but I'm told to do this CYA thing to basically make you fail and then fire you. Well, you know why people sue? They sue because they feel disrespected or they feel angered, right? And a PIP really doesn't. Lawyers have been saying for years it protects you. Yes, it may help document stuff in a lawsuit, but it's sort of counter. There's a famous study where insurance companies listened in on patient conversations with their doctors, and the tone in which the doctors talked to patients was much more likely indicative of them being sued than the actual medical errors that they made. And so I think so many of these PIPs are done not to get to a product. They don't even want the person to be there. So is it better to put them on something that they're going to fail, or say, Brandon, here's the work you'd have to do. Here's where you'd have to be. I'm not sure it's actually going to work out. How about we help you find something elsewhere and give you the time and the space to do that? So I don't believe any of the information that companies are being given up PIPs is accurate. I think yes, if you get sued, it'd be great to have the details. But the reason why people sue is because they feel aggrieved or disrespected in the first place.
Right. Well, in the book, you said that the PIPs often are addressing the symptoms rather than the root cause. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Also, a PIP is at the end of the problem, right? It's already, you have a headache, right? And so I can give you a Tylenol. The problem is, the source of headaches for one person could be dehydration, for one person could be gluten allergy, and the other could be a brain tumor, right? So if we're getting to the PIP by the time performance and trust and everything are broke down, this program is sort of 6 to 9 months earlier. When Brandon's first starting to show signs of trouble, and let's say, again, Brandon's coming into work, sorry to pick on you, but you're here. You're coming into work late and a little not into it. And if I'm the manager, I sit down Brandon, but what's going on here? In real conversation. There could be a couple different routes and they have to be treated differently. You could have lost your childcare and you've been having to work these different hours. Your spouse can't cover and you've been sort of covering for that and are super stressed, right? That's something you're going to have to fix, but the company can help, with that, maybe with the hours or otherwise, and kind of talk around it. Turns out you're distracted and everything because you've been interviewing every morning for 2 months, right? And you hate the company and you want to leave. Like, that's a different route. Or the third one could be like you actually transferred from marketing into sales and you're really not loving sales and you'd actually like to go back to marketing. You were kind of a star there, right? So if I get into either of those issues early enough, we can possibly, make some changes or otherwise, but they're totally different reasons for the same symptom showing. If I let either of these things go for 9 months, we're going to be at that same headache either way, and we're going to be sort of at the end. It doesn't matter the cause, right? So this is the whole thing. This process, if done correctly, comes so much earlier when you first start to notice these things, because I don't just decide to put you on a PIP like today. Like, it's usually after months of problems or otherwise.
Over the last few years, we've heard buzzwords like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting. Have these shaped your views on the outdated practice of the 2 weeks notice, or did they just really reaffirm your belief that it's just so flawed?
Reaffirm the belief. And honestly, I was delayed in this book because of COVID and then all this yin yang stuff. It's just this net zero game between, employees exploit their power, when they have the demand, and the employers exploit their power when they have the demand, and these things yin and yang back and forth versus like, how do we just treat people better and more honestly? What's interesting is like so many people hate and they complain that they're ghosted by a company for an interview. However, the data shows that like employees ghost companies more for interviews than employers go, or they don't show up for jobs or during the Great Resignation. These are the same people. These are the same people on both sides. So if we can just kind of stop trying to have a winner take all or zero sum game, and again, the problem is I think people can't separate this. I like this person, but their performance isn't good and it isn't working out. And how do I lean into that and try to get a better solution here than to just kind of throw out the whole baby with the bathwater?
I mean, one of the key components to creating a really good workplace is keeping the open communication between managers and employees. And in the book, you talk about a lot of simple questions that managers can ask direct reports on a regular basis to make sure that the line of communication stays open. What are some of those questions that you love to ask?
Yeah, I mean, one of them I like is, are you happy, present, and engaged? And even though those overlap with each other, you might grab different pieces, right? Oh, I'm really engaged in this piece, or I'm not happy. Again, I lost my childcare and it's just really stressful and it's hard for me to enjoy work these days. Even sometimes a simple open-ended question like, hey, how's it going? Like, how's it really going? There's a how's it going? And then there's people that ask that question where you sort of open up it's good, and I also watch in these questions, are there things that, you think you could be doing better? Are there things that you need? Are you enjoying your work? You also have to learn to watch as a manager the difference between what's being said and then the body language and the reaction, and dive in. Like, hey, you're saying engaged, but you don't sound engaged. What's going on here? And they will, if there is psychological safety and there is that trust in their manager, most people will open up. People know when they're not doing well. They don't want to not do well, but oftentimes they're scared or they have to put food on the family. And so they kind of feel they have to lie about what's going on, but they really don't like that. And there's just so many more opportunities for better outcomes. If I explained in that example before, you could have that go 3 different ways, if we kind of dig in early enough.
In the book, you highlight a case study around David and helping employees find their dream job elsewhere. I'm sure the leaders you've talked to are skeptical about this approach and worried that it's going to harm their company, but maybe just explain how that's really beneficial.
Yeah. So David's a great example of that, like early warning detection system. So David had been a great employee for our company for years as we grew. He was having some issues and some discontent. And so he clearly was not doing as well as he used to. And so we kind of dug in. And we're like, what's going on? Well, now that it's grown and my job has grown, I'm not doing as much of the work that I love. Like, I really love this data work and all this stuff. And really, like, the roles that we had were more account management at that point, and they weren't data oriented. And as you became a leader, you were doing more account management. And so his kind of manager flagged this around and said, look, David's okay. But we said, look, maybe we have a data science or an analytic person, but it's 6 to 18 months away. It's not anytime soon. So let's think about this. Let's keep talking. Shortly after this conversation, so that was sort of the prompt, knowing that, hey, we got to have to figure out something with David here. Like, he's not doing what he wants to do, and he can hold on for a little bit. But again, if we waited 9 months, he's going to be that pissed off, disgruntled person that then we're firing and saying has always been horrible. I got an email with a job description from a partner of ours, looked at it, shared it with my team, and I was like, this is exactly what David wants to do. So wasn't we all talked about it, and we were like, we should let him interview for this. Like, if this is really what he wants to do, we should let him go. Wasn't this person who sent me this email surprised when I wrote back and said, actually, I have someone on my team, probably a little skeptical that you should interview for this. But I said, look, we've talked to him. He really wants to do this. We gave him permission to interview. We also said, look, if it doesn't work out, we're again, there's no scarlet letter. We're back to where we were. We know that this isn't sustainable in the long run, and we'll figure something out one way or another. Well, he got that job. He doubled his salary, moved to California. He's still working at that company 8 years later. And last year they became a client, a pretty big client of our company as well.
That's incredible. I mean, like, a story like that, it highlights the importance of just like, transitioning people in a really human way. And it probably impacts your employer brand just as much as it does impact your culture.
Yeah, he's going to tell that story. He's going to, tell people, how he left. The next person is going to see that story or hear about that story, rather than the company where, oh, look, they were walked out again today with 3 hours, right? So you're kind of leaving a trail for the people that come behind you. So we have a lot of stories of our program over the year. I think that's still probably one of my favorite.
You wrote in the book that the root of an employee's problem almost always falls into 3 different categories. What are those categories, and how does recognizing the root of the problem help us get closer to a resolution?
Yeah, so the roots are sort of and the main 2 roots. There's a bunch of different ones, but they basically fall under things that you can change and things that you're not going to be able to change, right? And let's just talk about that. Like, someone comes to you and they say, I'm really unhappy, I want an office. And you say, look, like, we were a remote company when you came here. We were really honest about that. Like, we have a work program for some reimbursement for, if you want a shared space, but like, we're not gonna open offices. And so, that's something that we're just not open to changing. There's also kind of values things, right? We're not going to change our values or otherwise. I think the other types of things are, well, can we change them? And I gave a kind of example of that before. There could be 2 roots, right? So the root of the problem is, they lost their childcare, and they just can't come to work at those hours. Well, can we change their hours temporarily? Can we help them out? Can we do something to sort of relieve that and make it, better? Or maybe it's something about the job or the manager, and they, they think they're really pissed because they think they deserve a raise and they should have gotten one. You look, you're like, yeah, they really are underpaid. Like, we can fix that. So I think there's things that the 3 roots are really things that the employee could fix, things that the company can fix and wants to. And then there's things that are not going to change. And then we need to be kind of honest about that.
For organizations that follow into an industry that might have high turnover, less specialized roles, how do they adapt to the principles of the OTP, making sure that they're meeting demands? I'm thinking like manufacturing and production, where probably a lot of turnover is happening. How do we adapt?
Yeah, look, there's some people for whom, people are a little bit of a cog in the wheel, like a call center or otherwise assembly line. And so they may not want to put in all this work. I still think that all the foundational pieces to this, you'd also, first of all, you don't want to have 2 classes of citizens. You don't want to have people who work on the line and then people in the office. So I think the foundational elements of having these discussions and psychological safety and talking about it. Well, the pain might not be as bad as someone leaving with 2 weeks notice. They're still going to leave grumpy or otherwise, and you still might have the same problems. And again, a lot of those companies that have, these sort of roles, let's just say call center company, are you going to treat the call center employees differently than you treat kind of the managers? That also seems kind of set up for failure. So I think even if you didn't think you needed the benefits of the whole program, getting the communication, getting the psychological safety in place, that just is going to make your culture better.
You talk about this concept of the fading stars, where there are strong performers that may just not fit the evolution of the company. They just no longer fit. What advice do you have for leaders that might be struggling with a fading star?
Yeah, I really struggled with the fading stars as we grew. So for me, an A player is the right person in the right seat at the right time, sort of borrow from Jim Collins. And so sometimes the seat changes and the role changes. And we said early on, we to use a baseball analogy, when we were growing, we needed people to be kind of like really good utility players. Like we would throw them into this fire and that fire and go play some third and play some first. But then as we grew and we sort of needed like, all right, I need someone that's going to be an all-star first baseman, all-star second baseman. Some of those people still wanted to fight fires. And we were like, we're looking for like fire prevention and all-stars at each position. And we realized, that's just not going to work anymore. Unfortunately we had sort of rewarded that behavior. So I think it's really important to look objectively at any time between what that person wants to do, where the role is. This is the perfect example of the David story. Like it changed, right? It changed what the role needed. It changed what he was doing, and they were in different directions. So I think that's always an opportunity to revisit. And sometimes, again, someone was great in that early stage, and maybe we have a person for whom we changed their role and they've been killing it now for 8 years in that other role. But we had some people where that role just wasn't there anymore, right? And so what they wanted to do wasn't there. We had someone who was involved in HR and recruiting, and they really wanted to do the HR, and our needs went in recruiting. So what we did was we really helped them become sort of an HR generalist with training. And we said, we got to wait and see how this plays out. And it played out that it wasn't a recruiting role. It played out that we needed the recruiting role. So we hired a recruiter, and that person was perfectly set up to go be the director of HR somewhere else. And they got a great job and went in that direction.
You end the book with highlighting some elements of a successful transition. Maybe highlight a few of those.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, like these probably go in order of importance in the book, like have a written plan, like lay this all out, like the timeline, what we're doing, what the expectations are, interviewing, kind of work hours, all of these things. Let's not leave any of this to be ambiguous or subjective. And then timetables, I think, are really important. I generally 90 days is a pretty good window. So here's the timetable. You can have this, you're going to do this, but it really ends at 90 days because otherwise people won't put the work into their job search or otherwise, and they might not have a job by 90 days. But again, they were able to search for that job, being employed, having that reference it, like that is better than 95% of most cases. And then like anything, the communication's key. Open dialogue throughout this. If you know that someone, look, you have to understand that if they get a job really quickly, they're probably not going to stay the 90 days because they're not going to take they're not going to tell the company, I can't start for 6 weeks, right? Because they made that commitment. But that's where communication helps. Hey, I'm in the final round. They're letting me know next week. If I get the job at 2 weeks notice, like it is, then I'm going to need to go. All of that stuff is just solvable with better communication.
Robert, fun discussion. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Your book is called Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice, Changing the Way Employers Leave Companies for the Better. I appreciate you for sharing so much of this knowledge. I love the ideas. Want to leave people with a parting thought?
Yeah, the parting thought is don't be overwhelmed by this. If you're frustrated with the current process, there's just some small things that you can do to just even have these conversations that may lead to better outcomes. So first introduction, 2 chapters are totally open for free on Substack if you want to check it out. Again, take a read, see if it resonates with you, and you can just try having, next time you sense something, you can try just having an honest conversation. I venture to bet that it will exceed your expectations.
I know you're everywhere online, but what's the best way to follow your work and connect with you?
Yeah, the book, Substack, everything is at Robert Glazer, GLAZER.com.
My guest today has been Robert Glazer. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.